A doubling in global food demand projected for the next 50 years poses huge challenges for the sustainability both of food production and of terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems and the services they provide to society. In his 2002 paper, Agricultural Sustainability and Intensive Production Practices, David Tillman speaks of a revolution that took place around the 1950s, known as the Green Revolution. This refers to the research and development of technology that ultimately increased yields in agriculture. This was an incredibly important step in our progression as a species, resulting in a doubling of cereal production from the 1960s to the 2000s. However, with populations developing at such rates as they are now, by 2050, humans are projected to reach a population of around 10 billion. This is 4 times as large as 1950. With such numbers, it is not surprising that agriculture and livestock farming have become industrial-scale processes. According to the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, livestock production is the world's largest user of land, both directly through grazing or indirectly through consumption of grain. Globally, livestock production currently accounts for around 40% of the gross value of agricultural production. As global per capita income increases, the demand for greater food variety grows. Demand for higher value and quality foods such as meat, eggs and milk rises, compared with food of plant origin such as cereals. These changes in consumption, together with sizable population growth, have led to large increases in the total demand for animal products in many developing countries, and this trend will continue. Research conducted by Gideon Eshel et al. In 2014 compared livestock and their environmental burdens. It was no surprise when beef was calculated to require 28 times more land, 6 times more fertilizer, and 11 times more water compared to chicken, pork, laying hens, and dairy cows, in terms of calorific value. It takes around 7 kilos of grain to produce 1 kilo of beef. To further put this into perspective, it was calculated that staple crops, potatoes, rice, and wheat, required around 6 times less resources than pork, chicken, eggs, and dairy.
Currently, the population stands at 7.5 billion. However, the projected population by 2025 is 8.9 billion, and by 2050 is expected to rise to 10.25 billion. This is according to the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. A big concern with this growing population, besides housing, is food availability. And the food which is causing the biggest issue is the availability of meat, specifically beef, due to the many requirements necessary to farm cattle. The Food and Agricultural Organization of the UN states global meat production is currently projected to be 16% higher in 2025 than 2015. The big unknown is how to carry out large-scale meat production without affecting global carbon concentrations. The beef industry is the largest of all meat production, with current predictions stating that from the year 2000 to the year 2050, the cattle population is expected to increase from 1.5 billion to 2.6 billion. The biggest producers of beef are currently India, with a cattle population of 303 million, closely followed by Brazil with 200 million cattle. 65% of the world's beef is imported from Brazil and India, and this figure is set to increase to 73% by 2050. 1 kilogram of beef can produce up to 14.8 kilograms of carbon dioxide, and that's before transportation and packaging. Limiting cattle farming to single countries increases the carbon footprint of beef due to the need for more transport. Methane is a particularly big problem in beef production, as it is 21% more aggressive than CO2 in contributing to climate change. This is amplified further by the removal of carbon sinks via deforestation and for land to use for cattle farming. 30% of land, excluding frozen land, is used for cattle, so land which would have been used to remove carbon from the atmosphere is no longer available.
A solution for combating the food shortage would ideally be a meat and dairy-free diet, not only for the environmental advantages for land space, but could also be a solution for the obesity crisis. But we don't consume animal products for the sake of it. They are an important food group, so by cutting them out it can create limitations and can lead to a very strict diet for vegetarians and vegans. The most common problem of not eating enough meat is an iron deficiency, which without being treated can lead to an iron deficiency anemia, where the number of red blood cells in the blood is very low, causing a host of problems. Of course, there are other ways of consuming iron on a meat and dairy-free diet, but it comes in much lower concentrations and is absorbed less, as you can see. The iron is split into two types, heme from meat and non-heme from fruit, vegetables and dairy. Non-heme type is less readily absorbed than the heme type, so it can be a restriction of a veggie lifestyle, but a positive for someone who has hemochromatosis, as this way the iron would absorb much slower and not build up, leading to diabetes and liver disease. Absorption of zinc from fruit and veg is also not as effective as it is from animal proteins. A deficiency can lead to negatively affecting the body's ability to heal and a poorer immune system. Also, cholesterol is required within all the body's cells. It is used for synthesis of sex hormones and production of vitamin D, and since cholesterol is only found in animal products, a diet that is dairy and meat-free has no access to this compound. Increased risks of many other conditions are caused by the low concentrations of nutrients, such as a calcium deficiency, leading to osteoporosis, and a low count in vitamin B12 from animal foodstuff, leading to stomach lining thinning, making it much harder to absorb the vitamins. A vegetarian diet can meet the current recommendations of nutrients, but it can't be done without the use of additives, supplements, and fortified foods to escape this deficiency net. As well as with age, it becomes harder for the body to absorb vitamins, so an excess of the supplements will be required to meet the body's demand.
So I think that, of course, sustainable food and fuel for the future means that there is sort of going to be intensification of farming practices, and there has been for the last, 2 decades or something, more so than before. But I think there is talk of new ways to try and produce food that's more local. So, for example, urban farming or vertical farms on roofs that are much more local to the people that's going to actually consume those foods, and that would cut down at least transport and some of the environmental issues that go with transport. There's also talk about things like biochar and things like that to put it into soils to try and regenerate some of the soils, which I think is a big problem with intensive farming and over farming. And there's a lot of initiatives to try and improve soil health, whether that be by putting more organic matter in, or there's also initiatives to try and put the right microbes in the right rhizosphere community in to try and put something back in the soil that would be beneficial for plants to, again, try and sustain that food production for the future. Could say that urban farming has also taken on some of the new technologies such as LED technology, hydroponic growth, etc. So it would be a balance between what's that needed in terms of any sort of vertical farming and buildings relative to the energy that's going into it.
Okay, here we will look into ways of overcoming the problem of overfarming, and probably at the forefront of ways to tackle overfarming is improving the yield of crop through genetic modification. Genetic modification is pretty common now, with around 85% of corn in America being genetically modified, and the figure shown here is an indication of the impact a GM crop can have on the yield by reducing the amount of crop loss by nearly 50%. I thought I would give an example on the application and improvement a GM crop can make. This particular paper was looking at ways to improve the yield of crop through altering non-photochemical quenching, or NPQ. NPQ is a photoprotective mechanism which will protect the plant from light damage in high light. However, when light goes from high to low, NPQ will continue to protect the plant, but in doing that it will reduce the photosynthetic rate of the plant by reflecting sunlight which the plant could be using. By altering the NPQ, so it shuts down quicker, you can improve the yield of a crop by nearly 20%. Another idea for tackling meat consumption is the in vitro production of meat. This idea is problematic and quite controversial. However, if it was to take off, Oxford Uni predicted that in Europe alone it would reduce land use by 98% and it would use 30 to 55% lower energy. The idea is to take the embryonic stem cell of a farm animal and put them into a bioreactor with a plant culture to grow. They will later be encouraged to differentiate into muscle tissue on a grid. Currently, in vitro meat production could only really be used to make a burger or a chicken nugget, and there is a lack of funding in the department, and likely there would be a very divided public opinion. However, it is estimated that under normal conditions, 10 cells could grow into 50,000 metric tons of meat in only a 2-month period. And finally, a company called Aquaponic is combining aquaculture, which is the raising of fish, and hydroponic, which is the growth of plants without soil, to grow both together as a unit. The fish would provide organic food for the plant, and the plant would naturally filter the water for the fish.